He was on his way to a multi-million-dollar meeting at the London Heathrow airport until he saw something that completely paralyzed him. In the arms of the woman he could never forget, there was a baby. He had the same blue eyes that Alexander saw every morning in the mirror. She averted her gaze, clutched the child to her chest, and fled. In that second, Alexander understood. Maybe he had lost more than just a love. Maybe he had lost a son. If you've arrived here by chance, don't leave. This story will captivate you in a way you don't expect. It's intense, real, and full of twists. Stay until the end, because this one, you're going to feel. The sound was constant. The scrape of suitcase wheels on polished floors, announcements over the loudspeakers in 3 languages, and the muffled murmur of voices broken by hurried goodbyes and tearful reunions. All of this seemed to be happening on another frequency for Alexander Thorne. The man in the dark suit and stern face stopped a few feet from the arrivals gate, but his gaze wasn't searching for a flight number. He was looking without seeing, like someone who has already arrived somewhere and doesn't know what to do about it. It was supposed to be just another arrival, a business flight from New York, another meeting filled with names that mattered on spreadsheets and charts, not in memories. Alexander knew this routine. Dominating boardrooms was easy. Dominating the silence within his chest was not. What he didn't expect was to see Veronica. Not there. Not like that. Not with a child in her arms. She walked briskly through the crowd of newly arrived passengers, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, and sunglasses that were too dark for the bright lobby. But that's not what stopped Alexander. It was the baby. The child was in her lap, his head resting on her shoulder, as if that were the only safe place in the world. And when she turned slightly, just for a second, the child's eyes met Alexander's. Cerulean. Blue like his. Not as a metaphor, but as a mirror. 1 second. 2. Veronica saw him. She stopped. That instant hung in time, as if the entire lobby had sucked the air from everyone's lungs. She didn't say anything, but the tight grip on the child's arm, the tension in her jaw, the way her lips pressed into a straight line, all of it said more than any hurried phrase. "Veronica," he whispered, more to himself than to her. But she heard him. She turned around with determination, as if running away were the only acceptable response. Her suitcases were already in her hand. The baby made a small sound, perhaps annoyed, perhaps scared. And then she disappeared into the crowd, as if she had never existed. Alexander stood there. The same man who had closed multi-million-dollar deals without blinking was now standing like a lost tourist, feeling the ground crumble beneath his feet. 2 minutes passed before he breathed, and when he did, he felt a question enter instead of oxygen. Is that child? He adjusted his tie, trying to hide the anguish growing in his chest. He called someone on impulse because the loneliness of that moment was unbearable. "Eleanor?" His voice came out firm, but tinged with something she hadn't heard in years. Uncertainty. "Hey brother, did you land? I just saw Veronica, with a baby, in her arms." "What? A baby?" His sister's casual tone vanished instantly. "Wait, how old is the baby?" "I don't know. Small, a year, maybe, a little over a year. She was at the clinic with him a few months ago. I went to take Sylvia's nephew. I saw her in the waiting room. She had a baby in her arms. I just thought." "You thought what? That it wasn't your business, that it wasn't our problem, that you had already moved on." Silence. "Does he have my eyes, Eleanor?" On the other end, she fell silent too, because she knew exactly what that meant. It wasn't about genetics. It was about what Alexander couldn't say. The fear, the guilt, the doubt that was now consuming him like acid. He hung up. There was nothing more to hear or to deny. In the taxi to the hotel, he didn't see London pass by the window. The glass became a projection screen for what was left unsaid, for what was misunderstood, for the image he couldn't get out of his mind. Veronica holding that baby as if he were her entire world. A world he, apparently, wasn't a part of. Upon arriving at the suite, he walked in a straight line to the bathroom mirror and faced himself as if in front of a stranger. He ran a hand through his dark hair, over the face that the press often called imposing, but that now only looked exhausted. He couldn't sleep. The night was a parade of jumbled memories, but one remained intact. The exact moment Veronica looked at him before she disappeared. That look didn't hold hatred. It held an ancient grief, a grief for something that had died before it was ever born. The next morning, Alexander dressed as he always did, a custom-tailored blazer, Italian shoes, a luxury watch. But something was wrong. It all felt like armor for someone who had already been wounded too many times, and who now, perhaps, had wounded someone else. His phone vibrated. It was an unimportant notification. He deleted it. He picked up his phone again, hesitated, and then dialed a number he hadn't used in years, that of the pediatric clinic. The name of the doctor he vaguely remembered, Maria Cortese, Veronica's friend. The call didn't go through. He gave up. At the hotel reception, he drank a coffee whose flavor he didn't even notice. And then, the sound of a child laughing somewhere hit him like a slap. The laugh was different, but it awakened something primitive inside him. An imagined memory. An absence he hadn't recognized until that moment. Veronica had disappeared. But what did she take with her? He didn't know, but he was going to find out. Because for the first time in years, Alexander Thorne felt scared. Not of losing contracts, power, or his image, but of having already lost something he might never be able to get back. What would you have done in Alexander's place? Would you have pursued the truth immediately, or let sleeping dogs lie? A buried truth. Alexander looked at his phone like a man holding a trigger, his finger hovering over a name he didn't have the courage to dial. Dr. Maria Cortese. The number had been saved for years, ever since an exhibition in London when he and Veronica were still together. Marina was there, her lab coat over a black dress, laughing at Veronica's jokes as if they were sisters. Back then, he felt like an intruder between them, but pretended not to care. Now, he needed that same woman to let him in on a truth no one wanted to admit out loud. He dialed. It rang twice before she answered. Dr. Maria Cortese, she responded on the other end, her voice dry and formal. Alexander cleared his throat. Maria, it's me. Me, Alexander Thorne. Silence on the other end. He heard only a faint sigh and the sound of papers being stacked. What do you want? I need to talk to you. It's urgent. If it's about Veronica, you've called the wrong person. No, you're exactly the right person, she scoffed. It wasn't a sound of impatience, but of weariness. Weariness of stories that hurt again after years of trying to heal. Alexander, I'm a doctor, a pediatrician. If you want to know something about Veronica, call her. If she doesn't answer, accept it. That should have been left in the past. I saw the child at the airport. He has my eyes, Maria. Exactly mine. The texture of the silence on the other end changed. It became dense, uncomfortable. Are you asking me to violate doctor-patient confidentiality? I'm asking you to be human. If he's my son, I have a right to know. And if he is, what are you going to do? Write a check? Announce a family photo op? It's too late for a redemption speech, Alexander. I don't want to save my image. I want to know if I have a son. That's all. She didn't answer. The silence this time felt like a no. Maria, I swear on everything I failed to say before. I just want the truth. I don't want to fight with anyone. Just give me an address. The address is the exit door from her life, and if you have a minimum of respect, from his too. Before he could respond, the line went dead. Alexander closed his eyes, clenching his jaw. The phone trembled in his hand, as if it wanted to say something he didn't dare to hear. Hours later, sitting on the brown leather sofa of one of the most expensive offices in London, Alexander looked at his lawyer, Callum Davies, a meticulous man, with a light suit and a calm voice. The kind of person who never gives quick answers because he knows his value is in the waiting. "And are you sure the child could be your son? He has my eyes. Exactly mine. And the timing matches. We broke up a little over 2 years ago. She disappeared right after that." Callum clasped his hands on the glass table. "Do you want to initiate a paternity suit? I want to know my options. Without exposing anyone. Not her, not the child. It's more complex than you think. I'm not here for what's easy." Callum leaned forward, adjusting his glasses on his nose. "Legally, you can file a lawsuit. But that means subpoenas, genetic material collection, forensic analysis, and public exposure. Are you going to sue the mother of your potential son?" Alexander looked away. For the first time since he entered that office, his silence wasn't a sign of control, but of doubt. "She's not going to make it easy," he finally said. "She hates me. Does she really hate you? Or is she just protecting herself from you?" Alexander didn't answer. Callum continued. "There's another way, a more delicate one. You approach her. You build a connection. You don't invade. You observe. And if the opportunity arises, you propose a DT test by mutual consent. But for that, she needs to open at least a crack for you. And from what you're telling me, she's still entrenched in anger. She thinks I said a child would ruin my life." "Did you say that?" "No, I said I needed time. I was trying to be responsible. I was afraid of repeating my father's mistakes. I just didn't know how to say it well. And she didn't know how to wait for the right moment." Callum was silent for a moment, then spoke cautiously. "Alexander, some battles are won not with force, but with presence. Sometimes just the fact of still being there changes everything." The next night, Alexander returned to his hotel and didn't turn on any lights. He stayed in the darkness. The city pulsed outside, but he seemed disconnected from the world. He sat on the floor of the suite, leaning against the wall, as if that brought him closer to reality. In his mind, an infinite loop. The baby in Veronica's arms, her expression when she saw him, the way she avoided him, as if he were a mistake from the past come back to haunt her. But there was something behind that look, something that wasn't hatred. It was too much pain to be just resentment. He picked up his phone again. He opened the gallery. An old photo. Veronica, with paint on her face, sitting on the floor of her studio, laughing. He had taken that photo secretly, after a silly argument. It was the last time he remembered her smiling without her guard up. Now, she held a child who was perhaps the fruit of that last night. A son, a piece of something that survived even when their love didn't. Alexander closed his eyes and swore he wouldn't rest until he knew the truth. But not by force, not with pressure. This time, he would do it differently. Because now, he was no longer just a man trying to understand the past. He was a potential father trying to earn the present. If you were Alexander, would you have chosen the delicate path, or would you have filed the paternity suit to get answers faster? Unearthing the past. The truth, when buried for too long, doesn't surface on its own. It demands to be dug up. And Alexander knew exactly where to start. Mr. Patrick lived on the outskirts of Yorkshire, in an old house with dark wooden windows, and a garden that, for years, seemed to take care of itself. It was the kind of place that held time within its walls, and memories no one dared to clean out. Alexander didn't announce his visit. He knew that if he did, he wouldn't be well received. The relationship between them was never close, cordial at best. There was something hard about Mr. Patrick, a silent pride that rejected any trace of the man who had hurt his daughter. Still, he knocked on the door. Twice. The third time, more firmly. "Who is it?" The voice on the other side sounded tired, not from age, from life. "Alexander." "Thorne." The lock slowly turned, and when the door opened, Mr. Patrick appeared with an expression that mixed surprise and contempt. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you. It's important. Important for you. For Veronica, too. Even if she never knows it." Mr. Patrick hesitated. He didn't invite him in, but he didn't close the door either. His eyes, gray and deep, examined him like someone trying to find humanity in a face known only for the pain it caused. 10 minutes. He finally said, turning away. Alexander followed him silently through the house. The furniture was old, but retained a certain dignity. There were photos of Veronica on the walls, a child, a teenager, an adult, painting, smiling in some, absent in others. And then, a recent image. Veronica with the child in her arms, laughing. The photo didn't look posed. It was real, almost alive. Alexander's heart faltered. They sat facing each other, separated by a wooden table marked by time. Mr. Patrick poured coffee, but didn't drink it. "Did Veronica have a son?" Alexander asked, direct, no beating around the bush. "What if she did? I need to know if he's mine." Mr. Patrick looked at him for several seconds. He didn't answer immediately. Only the slight creak of the chair as he leaned back broke the silence. "She was pregnant when you two broke up, but you didn't come back. You didn't ask. You didn't look. I thought she had left because she didn't want anything to do with me anymore. You gave her every reason for that." "I never—" Alexander stopped, as if the weight of the memory was closing his throat. "I never said I didn't want the child. I said I needed time, that I was scared. I didn't want to repeat the abandonment I experienced. My father was a ghost in my childhood. I thought that by trying to prepare myself, I was doing the right thing. But what she heard," Mr. Patrick said firmly, "was that a child would ruin your plans, that she was a problem, that the pregnancy was a burden." Alexander ran a hand over his eyes, as if he wanted to erase the last few years. Or perhaps just that exact moment when everything broke. "I never said that. But you didn't deny it either. And silence, son, sometimes shouts louder than words." Mr. Patrick stood up. He walked to a shelf, took something, and returned with a small, discreet photo frame. He handed it to Alexander. It was a photo of the child. On the floor, surrounded by brushes, his blue eyes fixed on the camera, a shy smile on his face, and his hand stained with red paint. It was as if Veronica had painted that moment with her soul. "Leo Gabriel," Mr. Patrick said. "That's his name." The impact of the name made Alexander lean back in his chair. "Gabriel was my grandfather's name," he whispered. "And Leo was the name I wanted for my son, if I ever had one." Mr. Patrick didn't respond. He just watched. "She knew that?" "Of course. You told her one night after a few glasses of wine, thinking no one would remember. But she remembered everything." Alexander held the frame tightly, as if he could extract more than just an image. It was strange. This child, whom he didn't know, seemed to carry fragments of him scattered across his face, as if each feature were an answer to questions he never dared to ask. "She didn't give me a chance." "No. She protected herself. And now?" Mr. Patrick took a deep breath. He walked to the window, from which the overgrown garden was visible. "Now you're here, years later, trying to mend what time has torn. But no seam erases the wound. What do you really want?" Alexander hesitated, and for the first time, not out of pride or control, but out of genuine fear. "I want to get to know my son, but I don't want to invade their space. I don't want him to suffer for mistakes that are mine." Mr. Patrick turned slowly. His eyes, once hard, now held something more complex, an old disappointment that was beginning to give way to something resembling compassion. "She still loves you," he said, like someone revealing something forbidden. "But it's a love she hides even from herself. Because what you did, or failed to do, taught her to live with your absence, and learning to live without someone is harder to unlearn than you can imagine." Silence fell between them like an invisible wall. "And the child? Does he know who his father is?" "No. Veronica raises him alone. She says his father is far away." Alexander felt his stomach churn. As if that distance was more than geographical. It was emotional. As if his absence had become an empty presence, a named void. "I want to make amends, truly, even if I have to go slowly, even if she never forgives me, even if he never calls me Dad. I just need to be close." Mr. Patrick approached, looked him in the eyes. There was something there that Alexander hadn't seen since the days when he was still a part of that family. Recognition, not approval, but a beginning of acceptance. "Then prove it. But not to me, or to her. To time. Because time has a price. Always." Alexander nodded. He stood up, holding the frame for a moment before returning it. "Can I see him?" Mr. Patrick smiled. Small. Sad. Almost invisible. "Not yet, but perhaps if you are patient someday." And that, for Alexander, in that moment, was the closest thing to hope he had ever received. What do you think is the best way for Alexander to earn Veronica's trust and get to know his son? Do you think she should forgive him? A crack in the door. The cell phone screen illuminated Alexander's face with an almost symbolic coldness. A saved number. An old photo. A memory encapsulated in pixels. The last time he had called Veronica was 2 months before the end. She didn't answer that night, and he never tried again. Now, there were 4 attempts in less than 2 days. It rang. It rang. It went to voicemail. He listened to the automated voice with a mix of frustration and resignation. The voice that said, "Leave your message," after the tone seemed to mock him, as if saying, "You're late, Alexander, very late." No message could fit in that space. He tried again, once more, and again. Nothing. The next morning, Alexander went to Veronica's studio. Not on impulse, out of insistence. He had looked up the address the night before, a small studio in the Shoreditch neighborhood, with a weathered facade, large windows, and colorful curtains that seemed to hide her from the world. Or protect her from him. His car stopped a few feet away. Alexander got out, adjusted the collar of his coat, and walked with tension trapped in his shoulders. There was no confidence in that gesture. It was awkward, even invasive, but he couldn't keep running from the only thing that mattered. He knocked on the door. Nothing. He knocked again. "It's closed!" a female voice shouted from inside. But it wasn't an angry voice. It was weary. "Veronica," he said, his voice firm from the other side. "It's me." Silence. Then, slow footsteps. And then, the doorknob turned with hesitation. She appeared. Barefoot. A large t-shirt stained with paint, her face clean but drawn. Her eyes were sunken. And yet, it was still her. Or perhaps only the pain was. Veronica looked at him for 2 seconds, that felt like a verdict. And then she opened the door just enough for him to see her, but not enough for him to enter. "What do you want, Alexander?" He didn't answer immediately. His throat was dry, the words short. "To know the truth." "The truth?" She laughed bitterly. "You're 4 years too late. The truth has already learned to live without you. Let me in." "Please, my bus." She hesitated. And in that brief interval, maybe she replayed everything. The ending, the words said and unsaid, The positive test in her hands, his absence, her belly growing, the first night the baby cried, the loneliness, everything. And then she opened the door. She said nothing. She just turned, walking into the studio. He followed her. The place smelled of fresh paint, turpentine, and jasmine. There were canvases propped up against all the walls, unfinished portraits, bright colors mixed with intense shadows. As if each canvas were an attempt to explain a feeling she couldn't say out loud. She grabbed a bottle of water, took a sip, leaned against the wooden table covered in brushes, and looked at Alexander. "You saw him, didn't you?" He nodded, unable to hide the lump in his throat. "At the airport. And that's why you came?" "I came because..." His voice failed him. "I needed to know if he's my son." She crossed her arms, her eyes fixed on him. "He is." Silence. He felt his legs give way inside, as if the floor were an inch lower. The confirmation hit hard. "Is." As if it were inevitable, undeniable, irrefutable. As if the world knew before he did. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question came out low but sharp. "Because you had already decided for me. You said a child would ruin your plans, that it wasn't the right time, that it was complicated. I said I was scared, that I needed to understand what it would be like. I was trying." "Trying what, Alexander? To justify your disappearance? To leave me with the responsibility of deciding alone whether to have an abortion or raise a child of yours without you? I didn't know how to react, and you shut the door on me. You disappeared. And you? You never came back to look for me. Not a single message. Not even an, 'Are you okay?' Nothing. You left me alone when I needed someone the most. And now you show up with a repentant face, looking for answers. I'm trying to understand." She laughed without humor. "No. You're trying to control a story that is no longer yours. What do you want, Alexander? Shared custody? A DNA test? A nice family photo at Christmas?" He took a deep breath, seeking balance. "I want to be a father, if he lets me, if you let me." Veronica walked to one of the canvases covered with a sheet. She removed it carefully. It was an unfinished painting. Leo, asleep on the sofa, wrapped in a blue blanket, his little hand closed in a fist, as if fighting even in his sleep. "He doesn't need money. I never needed yours. I know. He has a school, a pediatrician, a stable life, and, most importantly, he has peace. And me?" The question escaped him. "Did you never miss me?" She looked at him. For an instant, there was no anger. There was something else, something more painful. "Yes, but only in the silences. Only when he asked why some dads went to school and his didn't, and I had to say that his father was far away. But how far away? On the moon? At work? At the bottom of the sea?" She closed her eyes, holding back tears. "I raised my son without a complete story, and yet he is whole. And now you come, wanting to occupy a space that, for him, isn't empty. It's his normal." Alexander approached. Slowly, with the respect of someone stepping on an emotional minefield. "I don't want to take anything away from you. I just want a chance to be present. I won't impose myself or force my way in. Just let me get to know my son." Veronica ran a hand over her face. She walked to the door. She opened it. "I need to think." He nodded. He walked toward the exit. Before crossing the threshold, he turned back. "Thank you for giving him a name that was mine. Leo Gabriel." She froze for a second. "You remember that?" "I remember everything that mattered. I just didn't know what to do with it." She didn't reply. And he left. Outside, the world went on. But inside him, something had changed. The truth now had a face, a name, and a real space. He didn't know if he could reverse everything, but he knew that this time, he wasn't going to back down. Or give up. The first steps 2 days. That was the exact amount of time Veronica was silent. Alexander didn't push. He didn't call, didn't show up. He just waited. Not as a noble gesture, but because it was the only possible path. He knew that pushing would be repeating the exact error that had separated them. Now, everything he did had to come with listening, with presence, with a real intention. On the morning of the third day, Veronica sent a brief message. "Come by at 5. Leo usually paints until 6. Then he sleeps. But just observe, Alexander. Just observe." He replied only with a "thank you." More would be too much. Less would be cowardice. At 4:45, Alexander was already standing on the other side of the street, watching the low building with its base facade, pots on the balcony, and blue curtains fluttering. He was nervous, more so than at any board meeting, and that irritated him because it made him feel vulnerable. But this time, he didn't want to seem strong. He just wanted to be there. Veronica opened the gate promptly at 5. Her hair was in a messy bun. She wore glasses and an old sweater with paint stains on the cuffs. "Come up," she said, without smiling or frowning. Just firm. The apartment was small, but there was beauty in every corner. A bookshelf with children's books next to Veronica's paintings, toys organized methodically, and in the center of the living room, like the beating heart of the home, was Leo. Sitting on the floor with his legs crossed and a large sheet of paper in front of him, the boy dipped a thick brush into a pot of green paint and dragged it across the paper with the precision of someone building an entire world. He had Alexander's eyes, but what struck him most wasn't the resemblance. It was the child's concentration, the way his lower lip was trapped between his teeth as he painted. It was the life that emanated from him, a life he hadn't helped create, but that he now wanted to deserve. "He has a cold," Veronica said in a low voice. "It started yesterday, but this morning he had 38.5. Alexander turned, alert. "Did you give him medicine?" "An antipyretic in the morning, but now it seems like it's going up again. His eyes are a little glassy. His temperature goes up, and then he sweats. It's the second time this year." She said it naturally, like someone who had been through this many times. He just listened, and he felt the bitter taste of having missed all of his son's little sick days. "Can I?" She nodded. Alexander crouched down, slowly kneeling next to the child. "Hi, Leo," he said in a calm voice. The child looked at him sideways, then went back to his painting. No negative reaction. No attempt to get closer either. Just silent recognition. Veronica watched from a distance. There was tension in her posture, but also something else. An inner astonishment. Seeing Alexander there, kneeling next to her son, was like watching an old wound being touched without anesthesia. "Leo," she said gently, "we're going to take your temperature again." The child didn't respond. He just dropped the paintbrush and stood up. Noticeably slower. Alexander noticed for the first time the fragility of childhood, the slightly watery eyes, the cheeks redder than normal, the wobbly steps. Veronica took the digital thermometer and placed it on the child's forehead. The device beeped. 39.2. She tensed. "It's going up," she murmured, picking him up. "I have to take him to the hospital." "I'll go with you," Alexander said without hesitation. She hesitated, but she didn't say no. The children's hospital was 20 minutes away. Veronica sat in the back seat with Leo in her arms, while Alexander drove. The child slept on his mother's chest, and Alexander watched him in the rearview mirror more times than he noticed. A silent storm was forming inside the car, made of fear, guilt, and love, all at the same time. "He has recurrent tonsillitis," Veronica explained, looking out the window. "The pediatrician said he might need follow-ups if it continues." "And you handle all this alone?" She didn't answer. I'm sorry. I know I don't have the right to ask. She slowly turned her face, looking at him through the rearview mirror. You don't. But you're here. That phrase hit him in a way he couldn't process. Being there, with her and Leo, wasn't an act of redemption. It was a silent permission, a fragile vote of confidence that he couldn't break. At the admissions desk, Veronica filled out the forms while Alexander held Leo, who was now crying. A low, drawn-out cry of discomfort and fever. Alexander had never held a sick child, and this moment hurt. He whispered words he didn't even know if they made sense. It's okay, little one. Daddy's here. Veronica heard him. She didn't say anything, but she pressed her lips together tightly. In the exam room, the doctor examined him carefully. Seeing his inflamed tonsils, she diagnosed the crisis. Viral tonsillitis. We'll start him on antibiotics and control the fever. It can be very bothersome. It's important to keep him well hydrated, okay? Veronica nodded. Alexander did too. The doctor looked at both of them, then at Leo. He's a lucky boy, she said, smiling. They left the hospital with the sky already dark. Veronica was carrying the child. Alexander was at her side, carrying the backpack and the prescription. When they got to the car, she hesitated. Do you want to take him now? The question was blunt. No, of course not. He needs you. But if you let me, I can go to your place, help give him his medicine, stay with him for a while. Just to, not disappear again. She looked him in the eyes. You have no idea what it means to disappear? No. But I'm trying to understand. Back at the apartment, Leo was restless. Alexander held him while Veronica prepared the antibiotic. The child rested on his father's shoulder, feverish but calm, as if he recognized something there. A scent, a gesture, a forgotten space. When it was time to give him the medicine, Leo cried. He turned his head. He closed his mouth. He hates that flavor, Veronica sighed. Alexander then knelt down, with the child in his arms. Leo, I know it tastes bad, but it's going to help you. Then we can watch a cartoon, okay? Leo looked at him. He stopped crying. He opened his mouth. Veronica watched in silence. And then she understood. Alexander wasn't trying to be the perfect father. He was just trying. And that, in that moment, was more than she had ever hoped for. Leo fell asleep on the sofa. Veronica covered him with the blue blanket. Alexander remained standing beside him, his hands in his pockets. He falls asleep faster when he's sick, she said, adjusting the pillow. Just like you. He fell silent but didn't leave. She smiled faintly, a smile that barely existed. I still don't know what to do with you being here. Neither do I. But I'll stay until you do. She nodded, looking down. In that small room, surrounding their son's fever, they were on the same side for the first time. Not as a couple, not as the past, but as parents, caring for something that united them more than the pain could separate. And without needing to speak, they knew this moment wasn't a final stop. It was the first paragraph of something they didn't yet know how to name. A constant presence. The visits began 3 days later. Veronica set clear limits. 4 times a week, 2 hours a day. No going over. No trying to occupy a place that wasn't his yet. Do you want to be present, Alexander? She said firmly. Then you start by showing up. Every day you agree to, without being late, without excuses. And if you fail, Leo will notice before I do. It wasn't a threat. It was a sincere warning. And he understood. The first visit was tense. Alexander arrived 5 minutes early, in dark jeans and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He carried a children's book in his hand, not even knowing if Leo liked stories. When she opened the door, the child was on the sofa with a half-eaten banana in one hand and a cartoon playing softly on the TV. "Hi, Leo," Alexander said, kneeling to his level. "Can I hang out with you for a while?" Leo looked at Veronica. She nodded, and the boy simply offered him the banana, as if testing, "Do you know how to share?" Alexander took the piece, took a bite, and smiled. Veronica watched from a distance, not intervening. That day, Alexander just stayed there. He sat on the floor, listening to Leo talk a little and move a lot. He discovered that he liked building blocks, that he hated when they were sorted by color, and that he cried when the TV character fell down. He tried to pick up a toy car, but Leo firmly took it back. Veronica didn't laugh, but she was close. "He's possessive with the red cars," she commented. "They're the fast ones, as he says. And this one is Fernando, because it goes like Alonzo." Alexander smiled, surprised. On the second visit, Leo cried when Alexander tried to pick him up. On the third, he allowed him to push him on the park swing. On the fourth, he fell asleep while Alexander read him a story about a bear who didn't know how to hibernate. Veronica, with her arms crossed by the door, watched each scene with the resistance of someone who has been disappointed too many times to allow herself hope. Alexander reorganized his life. He canceled trips. He delegated meetings. He started waking up an hour earlier to answer emails before his visits. And he created a fixed space in his schedule called Leo Time. The partners complained. The secretary was surprised. His sister Eleanor was the only one who understood. "Finally, you're no longer the CEO of your pain," she said during a coffee break. "You're starting to be a dad. I don't know if I'm doing it right." She didn't know either, but she did it, and now it's your turn. Little by little, the ritual formed. Leo waited for the doorbell. Veronica, though she wouldn't admit it, counted the minutes to see if he was late. And Alexander would arrive, always with something. A small toy, a new book, a packet of stickers from the World Cup. One day, Veronica interrupted him bluntly. "He doesn't need gifts." "I know, but he likes them. He likes them because he hasn't learned to distinguish affection from compensation yet." Alexander stopped, the package in his hand. He thought about responding, but he didn't. He just put it in his pocket and sat on the floor next to his son, saying nothing. Leo looked at him, held out a clumsy drawing, a blue figure with giant eyes. "That's you." Alexander swallowed. "I'm blue?" "It's because blue is the color that flies, like airplanes." Veronica didn't comment. But that night, while putting away Leo's toys, she folded Alexander's shirt, which had been forgotten on the back of the sofa, and put it in a bag. She thought about giving it back to him the next day, but she couldn't. Over time, Alexander learned to change diapers after a catastrophic attempt where Leo peed on him and then pointed, laughing. Veronica watched from the kitchen, almost impassively, though with the corner of her mouth curled in a contained smile. He also learned to prepare the bottle with the exact amount of chocolate. "If you put too much, he spits it out," Veronica would say, and to read stories with different voices for each character. One day, Leo fell in the park and scraped his knee. Alexander got to him before Veronica. He picked him up, not knowing if the hurt was more from the wound or the scare. When Leo cried, he hugged him tightly, and the child cried more, with that profound weeping that only happens when one feels safe. Veronica saw the scene from afar. She took a deep breath, and for the first time in months, she cried alone in the bathroom, not knowing if it was out of relief or fear. Alexander started preparing a room in his apartment. He painted the walls light blue, bought a child's bed with removable rails, and had a shelf custom-made with space for toys and books. He chose everything personally, something he never did. There was something almost therapeutic in the process, as if each detail were a silent apology. One of those days, Leo had a mild fever, and Veronica didn't let him go to the park. Alexander went anyway. He sat on the living room floor, playing a memory game with him. "If you get this right, you get the magical power to turn into a dragon," he said, pointing to 2 cards. Leo laughed. "A blue dragon? With cloud wings. Do you turn into one too?" "Only if you want." Leo turned over the cards. He failed. "Not this time," he said, shrugging. Alexander leaned in and whispered, "We'll try again, until we get it right." Veronica, in the hallway, listened, and she understood. He wasn't talking about the cards. One afternoon, when Alexander arrived for another visit, Leo ran to the door, jumping with joy. Alexander picked him up naturally, and the child rested his head on his shoulder. Veronica, behind them, watched in silence. "He called me Lex last night," she said in a low voice. "He was playing alone and said, 'Lex is coming tomorrow.'" Alexander froze. He took a breath. It was the first time he had been given a name. Veronica felt it. She then looked him in the eyes. "You're entering his life, and that's more serious than any contract you've ever signed. I know. Then if for any reason you're going to give up, if you ever have doubts, tell me beforehand. Because I'd prefer a permanent absence to another inconsistent presence." "I didn't come here to leave," she didn't reply. But she let him stay for another half hour that afternoon, and a half hour turned into an hour. Then, 2. The limits remained, but they began to soften as Alexander stopped being a visitor and became a presence. Veronica's rigidity gave way to a softer vigilance, an attentive gaze, yes, but less hardened. And more than any formal permission, there was something subtle that Alexander began to notice in the details. The coffee she left on the table, though without offering it. His jacket folded neatly on the back of the sofa. The way she sometimes laughed quietly when Leo exaggeratedly imitated him. Trust didn't arrive with a bang. It entered through the cracks, in silence. One Tuesday afternoon, while Leo colored a blue dragon with pink feet, Alexander commented, "I was an idiot, Veronica." She continued painting next to her son, as if she hadn't heard. But she answered minutes later, "You were, but you're not anymore." The words were few, but they carried an entire world. Casual conversations emerged like small, inevitable leaks, becoming more and more difficult to contain. They talked about Leo, about how he walked with his feet turned in on purpose, just to see if anyone noticed, about the school she was thinking of choosing, about the first time he bit another child, and then apologized with a drawing of a dinosaur. And, little by little, they also talked about what was impossible to ignore. "Did you know I kept painting?" she asked one night, while Leo slept and Alexander washed the paint jars. "I wondered, but I wasn't sure." "I stopped for a while. When I found out I was pregnant, I spent weeks without touching a brush. I felt that anything I created had no meaning. And what changed? The first time Leo put his hands in a pot of paint, he got the whole floor messy. I got furious. But then, when I saw the mess, it looked like art. The most honest I had ever seen." Alexander laughed. Then he became serious. "He saved you, didn't he?" She thought about it, and said, "He made me choose to keep living. It's not the same, but it's a start." Leo's birthday was approaching. Veronica was torn between doing something intimate or a small party. Alexander insisted on helping, and to both their surprise, she accepted. They planned a celebration in the building's courtyard with the closest neighbors, Alexander's sister, and Veronica's father. Veronica took care of the decorations, the food, the playlist of children's songs. Alexander organized the games, set up a tent with cushions for reading, and bought a 3-tiered cake. Too much, according to her. But he just replied, "If there's one thing Leo isn't going to suffer from, its symbolic absence. On the eve of the birthday, they spent the afternoon preparing party favors. "Do you have some kind of childhood trauma about birthdays?" she asked, folding small bags. "Only the silent ones. The ones nobody remembered. The ones my mother pretended didn't exist, so as not to provoke my father." Veronica looked at him. Serious. "And now?" "Now I want him to have all the sounds I didn't." She said nothing. But later, she let him read to Leo before bed, without her watchful gaze from before. And then, when Alexander said goodbye at the door, she held the doorknob for a second longer than necessary. "Thank you," she whispered. The birthday morning dawned sunny. The courtyard slowly came to life, blue and yellow balloons, tables with juice and sweets, children running, soft music. Leo, wearing a t-shirt with a dragon he had drawn himself, ran among the adults, spreading laughter and paint stains on their arms. Alexander arrived early, with Eleanor at his side. She brought a gift wrapped in artisanal paper and hugged Veronica gently, like someone who knows the other's pain and still draws close. "You're so strong, did you know?" Eleanor said. "Few people would have created all this with what you had." "I didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice. You chose love. That changes everything." Veronica smiled, contained. Mr. Patrick also arrived. He brought a small box with a handmade wooden toy car. When Leo saw it, he ran to him and hugged him tightly. Veronica watched with teary eyes. Alexander kept his distance, respecting everyone's space. The party continued with simplicity and beauty. Leo played with everyone, but always came back to Alexander to show him a gift, ask for help with a button, or point to a new child. The gestures became natural, his presence constant, and Veronica's looks no longer held distrust. At cake time, everyone gathered around. Leo climbed onto the chair, helped by Veronica. Alexander stood beside him, holding a colorful candle. "Make a wish, son," she told him. Leo looked at her, then at Alexander. And suddenly, in a voice still childish but firm, he stretched out his arms and said, "Dad." The world seemed to stop for an instant. The silence that followed was filled only with the sound of Alexander's heart, beating with an unknown force. Veronica held her breath, her eyes filled with tears. Eleanor put a hand to her mouth, moved. Alexander looked at Leo. He knelt down. He picked him up. "Yes, son. Dad," Veronica cried. Silently, deeply, not out of pain, but out of surrender, out of a relief that carried years of weight. She looked at Alexander. There was no longer resentment there. There was love, still wounded, still uncertain, but alive. For the first time, they looked at each other not as people who had wasted time, but as people who decided not to waste it anymore. What do you think was the most significant turning point in the story? The revelation of the child's name, the hospital visit, or when Leo finally called him Dad, a call to action? If this story touched you, there are many more like it. Share your thoughts in the comments to keep the conversation going. What do you think happens to Alexander and Veronica next? What will their future look like?